Welcome to today's news briefing presented by California Office of Emergency Services, Cal-OES, and Listos California, co-hosted by Ethnic Media Services and California Black Media. I'm Sandy Close, EMS Director. Today's briefing, the focus is staying alert and safe through the storms. It's not too late to be prepared. For the last several weeks, severe storms pummeled communities across the state, underscoring the critical need to inform Californians about the vital resources available to them during these extreme weather events. While the forecast over the next few days is relatively clear, especially in comparison to what we all have experienced recently, drastic changes to the weather forecast can occur suddenly and with little notice. That's why it's absolutely imperative to be prepared. We ask our speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. And we ask our reporters to enter questions in the chat box, which we will take up as time allows. We urge speakers to respond to questions on the chat as well as in person. We will send a video of today's briefing and expanded bios with contact information for each speaker to all participants later today. Now I turn the conference over to our moderator, Regina Brown Wilson, Executive Director of California Black Media. She will introduce our speakers. Regina, take it away. You're on mute.
You would think after 3 years that I would have that down. So sorry, but thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you so much for joining the call today. You're going to hear from experts working on the front lines, our speakers. The first up will be Deanna Crofts-Pelayo, Assistant Director for Crisis Communications and Public Affairs with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. She'll provide a brief summary of the impact of the latest round of storms, as well as those areas of the state that were hit the hardest. We'll also hear from Cal-OES's Vance Taylor, who's the chief of the agency's Office of Access and Functional Needs. He'll take us through the state's coordinated emergency response systems during these severe weather events. Then you'll hear from Dr. Jason Wilken, who is CDC's Career Epidemiology Field Officer assigned to California's Department of Public Health, and Kim Johnson, Director of the California Department of Social Services. And then finally, we'll wrap up with Tony Cignarale, Deputy Insurance Commissioner for the Consumer Services at the California Department of Insurance, who will discuss some of the vital resources available to Californians during these trying times. Deanna, I'll let you go ahead and start.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Regina. Nice to see you again. I'm Deanna Crofts-Pelayo. I'm with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. We so appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today about the recent storms that have impacted our state. For those of you who are perhaps unfamiliar with our agency, Cal-OES is a critical hub to direct state emergency activities and harness the expertise of the whole of state government while working with our local, federal, and tribal partners. We firmly believe every Californian, regardless of age, ability, income, or language, deserves culturally competent education to prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters, including flooding. Through Listos California, the state has engaged a trusted network of community-based organizations, tribal governments, and CERT teams, community emergency response teams across the state to provide accessible in-language information during these trying times. We have experienced destructive flooding of homes, businesses, and communities. Those include levee breaches, mudslides, hurricane-force winds in many of our communities, and even a tornado. These storms are among the most deadly natural disasters in the modern history of our state. There's already been 20 reported deaths, unfortunately. To keep Californians safe, the full weight of the state and federal government has been rapidly deployed to protect impacted communities. The state is committed to continuing to support California communities and maximizing state and federal aid to those who have been adversely impacted by these winter storms. On January 12th, Governor Gavin Newsom requested an expedited major disaster declaration. The President Joe Biden, approved this major disaster declaration on January 14th for 3 specific counties: Merced, Sacramento, and Santa Cruz. I'll kind of maybe explain a little bit about what that major disaster declaration actually means for you. And then our next speaker, Vance Taylor, will kind of talk about some of the resources that California communities can benefit from because of this declaration. So the president can declare a major disaster declaration for any natural event that the president believes has caused damage of such a severity that it is beyond the combined capabilities of state and local governments to respond. A major disaster declaration provides a full, wide range of federal assistance programs for individuals and public infrastructure. So following that major disaster declaration, CalOES continues to work closely with FEMA to maximize aid and support communities during this storm event. We have made a request for additional counties to be added to the major disaster declaration to receive individual and public assistance as warranted by results of assessing the damage locally. While damage assessments are critical to establishing a basis to add a county as a designation in the major disaster declaration, it's imperative that emergency response and life-saving activities still remain a priority and go uninterrupted during storm conditions. So we're committed to coordinating with local officials to rapidly conduct these assessments and add any additional counties as appropriate. So we received a report this morning from the National Weather Service. And as we look into the coming days, we are seeing clear skies ahead. What I will say is that tonight into tomorrow, you may still see some scattered storms in Northern California and Central California, but ultimately the big storm event, the big kind of weather system that's been creating what are called atmospheric rivers is going to be coming to an end. We should see clear skies starting Friday. Like I had mentioned earlier, my partner Vance Taylor at CalOES will explain a little bit more about the resources available to Californians because of this major disaster declaration. And I will reiterate what Sandy Close said in the beginning. It's not too late to be prepared for the next emergency. It really is incumbent upon us all to talk as loved ones, family, and friends about emergency plans should another storm happen, or an earthquake, or even a wildfire later on in the season. So have those conversations with your family now, have an emergency kit ready. If you need to leave your house quickly, have a kit. If you need to stay at home, and then that communicating and checking in with loved ones will really also help be part of this overall culture of preparedness and resilience that we can have here in California. With that, I will hand it over to the next speaker. Thank you so much. And I'm available also in Spanish if needed at any point in time. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanna. I do believe that we were going to start any questions. We want to give people an opportunity to ask questions after you talk so that they're not waiting all the way until the end. So if there are any questions that are in the chat, I will read them now. I'm not seeing any, so I will give a second. And if anyone has any questions, you still have an opportunity at the end, but I didn't want you to have to hold. So if we're not seeing any questions, if we're not seeing any right now, we'll go ahead and go straight to Mr. Vance Taylor.
Excellent. Thanks, Regina. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Deanna. So as was indicated, and as everybody knows, we've been going through a pretty rough patch. We've had atmospheric river after atmospheric river after atmospheric river. And even though we have a break in the weather, we know that just like anything, that could change and more rain could be on its way. What we recognize is that anytime there are these type of disasters, that there are individuals who are disproportionately impacted by those disasters. And we're talking about older adults. We're talking about people with disabilities. We're talking about people who are economically disadvantaged or transportation disadvantaged, people with access or functional needs. And so to ensure that our emergency management systems, programs, and services are being rolled out in a way that's equitable and accessible to everyone is a top priority of the governors, of everyone at OES, and at our partners with FEMA. So what I want to make sure is that everybody understands that we're working to ensure that our systems are going to be working for everyone. As a part of that, we're looking at how do we leverage the resources made available through this major declaration that was approved by the president on the 14th. If you live in one of the 3 approved counties, then we are anticipating that other counties will be brought in, but you're going to be available, or eligible rather, to apply for federal assistance through FEMA. And some of that means being eligible potentially for grant money. It means being able to have essential items such as furniture or durable medical equipment replaced. It means potentially having assistance with rental aid. It could also mean being provided with housing and other needs assistance, things like eyeglasses, hearing aids, and other assistive devices. Individuals will also be able to apply for assistance to receive low interest SBA loans and other mechanisms to help them essentially recover and financially to get back on their feet. In order to apply for that disaster assistance, there's a phone number, it's 1-800-621-3362 that you can call. You can also use a FEMA mobile app or apply online. It's important that everybody understands that these services are available in different languages, that if you need ASL or captioning, that those services are also available. To make sure that people are able to register, FEMA will be sending out disaster survivor assistance teams to shelters in approved areas. Those are individuals that are going to work to provide any support that's needed in the registration process. So, for example, if you need language assistance, they'll provide it. If there's issues regarding literacy, they can read questions and explain questions and fill out paperwork and documentation for you. We're also going to set up, in partnership with FEMA, mobile registration intake centers. That's essentially going to be a service that will drive to locations where individuals are served so that people don't have to find a way to drive to shelters or access services through other means. So we're essentially trying to get to the community, take a one-by-one approach, and make sure that everyone that's been impacted that lives in an approved county is able to register for services. While all this is going on, we want to remind people that just because it's sunny today doesn't mean that you're necessarily out of hazard's way, right? We still have to plan so that we're safe and secure, resilient, independent, and healthy tomorrow. So we're encouraging everyone, especially individuals, if you have access or functional needs, make an evacuation plan, right? Think of 5 people who can help you evacuate. These are people that you can call 24/7. These are people that know you and your needs and that are part of your support network. Make a list, talk to them about what you might need, and make sure that they're ready. Also, follow guidance from local authorities. If they say you got to go to a shelter, or rather that you have to evacuate, then please evacuate. Know that the shelters are accessible. Know that we work to make sure that access and functional needs are considered, and that shelters have full accessible wraparound services. So if they tell you to evacuate, you got to go. And make sure you know what's going on. Sign up for free emergency alerts. You can go to calalerts.org and sign up for free emergency alerts. If you don't know what's going on, you won't know what to prepare for or what appropriate action to take. So please sign up for alerts, have a plan, and if you're in an impacted area that's been approved in the disaster, make sure you register for FEMA assistance. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back to you, Regina.
Thank you so much, Van. I know that we have a couple of questions that have come in the chat. I will ask them for the sake of time because I think they're pretty straightforward. And this would be if you or Deanna could respond to this. Is there any data in terms of which ethnic groups have been most impacted during the severe storms?
I haven't seen those particular statistics, although if we look at the demographics, there are demographics associated with each of those counties, and you can see a breakdown. But I don't have those at my fingertips.
Okay, we'll work Isela to get to see if we can find that information for you. And then we have another question. What are the eligible counties? But I believe Deanna just answered that. But just for folks who may not be looking in the chat, once again, Deanna, do you want to just say what those are?
Yeah, happy to, Regina. Again, we had requested quite a number of counties, I think about 49. The federal government came back and approved 3 counties to move forward because they saw for themselves the huge impact the storms have had on those counties. And so it is Merced, Sacramento, and Santa Cruz. And then I also saw another question in regards to the website and phone number for FEMA. And so Vance mentioned, you know, the FEMA resources. And with FEMA, we also receive Small Business Administration resources. And so that there is one hub for all federal disaster assistance, and that's at disasterassistance.gov. You can see the phone number there. You can also go through the app. And then as this emergency continues and we go into recovery, like Vance mentioned, we will be working with FEMA to open up these registration centers. And so then there will actually be people there that can walk you through how to apply.
Great. And Deanna, I know that this, once again, this was also Plachette from SAC Cultural Hub also had a question, and that you put in the chat, but this question was around Sacramento. What were the phone lines, I think, or the email addresses or websites that one should reach out to if they are in this particular county to get specific information for their counties?
Yeah, it's one central hub for the federal government, and it's at disasterassistance.gov. And so I think for folks that are in other counties, specifically, homeowners, business people. We want you to continue to let your counties know that you have experienced damages or impact because of the storm, and then that will only help them then be able to guide the federal government to show them the extent of damages locally.
Okay, great. Let's see here. And then we have Nora Estrada. I don't actually see your publication that you're with, but do these extreme climate changes mean that we are already experiencing climate change? What other disasters will or can we experience?
I think that's a great question, Nora. And I think what we're seeing here, at least at the Cal OES, the state side, is that, the hots are getting hotter, the wets are wetter. And so I think that we are experiencing kind of a combination of emergencies and disasters and weather-related natural events that maybe we haven't seen in the past. And so I think that this goes for kind of these atmospheric rivers and these winter storms, but also is very evident in our wildfire seasons that they have become longer and more intense. And so it's definitely part of the work that we do here as a state to ensure that our communities have not only the information they need before an emergency or a natural disaster happens locally, but also to ensure that they are able to mitigate any of those impacts beforehand. And so it's a lot of work to do. We are a huge state that has a very diverse communities and diverse geography, but we're definitely experiencing climate change now.
And this question, before we move on to Dr. Wilken, would be, is there a way to compare the impact of these storms on previous and extreme weather in recent years?
I think we have in a way. And so I think that these atmospheric rivers were very similar to maybe some of the flooding that we saw in like 1997, 1998. And then also some of kind of the weather events that happened. Gosh, now I'm trying to go back. Vance may have to help me here in 2017 for the Oroville, when the Oroville Dam emergency happened. And so I think what we look at too is, not only, human toll. And so I think if we were to just take the number of deaths that have happened, it would be very similar and very high up there among the most deadliest of natural disasters that we have had in state's modern history. And so it is a way for us to kind of look back at the past, but I think we've learned from the past and we've been able to get smarter and more innovative and get technology and try to get help out faster. And so it was a huge part of kind of the work that we did before we knew that these atmospheric rivers were going to be coming to California, to actually pre-position and move equipment and personnel in areas that we were anticipating that would be getting very intense damage. And so we've been able to have some swift water rescue teams and fire engines and emergency personnel in the right place at the right time to be able to make these rescues and saves. So I think it's part of all of the other work that we're doing to ensure folks are able to respond very quickly to disasters.
And then I'll do, we have two more questions, but we are like right at this, when I'm looking at my schedule. So I'm going to ask those questions after we have Dr. Jason Wilken talk. I'll go back to those questions. So don't worry, media, I have you in the queue. Dr. Wilken.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the invitation to present this morning. This information is really intended for protecting the public's health when returning home following a flood. And the best advice is really to avoid floodwater whenever possible. Floodwater can contain all sorts of things that are harmful for your health. It can contain toilet waste and associated bad germs. It can have hazardous chemicals, including things like gasoline. It can contain hidden heavy or sharp objects. Floodwater is typically murky and muddy, and you can't see very well in it, and it's very easy to become injured on a sharp or a heavy object that's hidden. Floodwater can also be in contact with downed power lines. And floods can also cause the migration of animals. So you can have live or dead animals in floodwater that you might not normally come in contact with. So the best thing that you can do to protect your health is to avoid contact with floodwater. Contact or consuming contaminated food or water can cause serious illness, including diarrhea and skin infections. And children are, of course, especially at risk based on their behavior. So if you have children, do not allow them to play in floodwaters or near floodwaters. Don't let them play with toys or anything that floodwater has gotten wet until those items can be disinfected. And always make sure to wash their hands with soap and water often, and always before meals. That's good practice at any point, but during a flood, it's especially important. Next, if you must be in contact with floodwater, if you're in an area that's been flooded, wear rubber gloves and wear rubber boots. This is a very good way to protect your skin from contact with floodwater. It's a very good way of making sure that you don't accidentally ingest floodwater. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, floods can also have substantial impacts on your drinking water. It can make drinking water unsafe to drink if it has been contaminated with floodwater. So if you are on municipal water, if you have tap water, your local water authorities will let you know whether the tap water is safe to use or whether it has to be boiled or whether it should not be used at all. So keep tabs with your local water authorities. They will tell you whether your tap water is safe to use. If you have a flooded well, then get in touch with local environmental health or with your water department for advice on how to test and disinfect your well. Bottled water itself is safe, but sealed bottles of water could still have been in contact with floodwater. So the outsides of those bottles, if they were in contact with floodwater, can be contaminated. And the best way to disinfect those sealed bottles is to boil them for 1 minute. Flooding can also contaminate food, and contaminated food is unsafe to eat. So other than undamaged cans or metal pouches, you should throw out any fresh or packaged food that had been touched by floodwater. And even in the case of sealed metal containers, those should still be cleaned, and the outside should be cleaned and disinfected before consuming what's on the inside. Let's talk about cleaning and disinfecting for a moment. The most common and recommended cleaner is a tablespoon of bleach into a gallon of water for cleaning utensils, for cleaning surfaces. This is a good all-purpose cleaner, but I think it's very important for people to keep in mind that you should never combine cleaners. So bleach plus ammonia, for example, will actually cause chlorine gas to be created. And that is something that can quickly overwhelm and incapacitate someone. So never mix cleaners. Use one tablespoon of bleach with 1 gallon of water for cleaning surfaces and utensils. And finally, drying your home and removing items that have been water damaged is your best route for preventing the growth of mold. Mold will grow on hard surfaces. You can contact your local health department for guidance on mold remediation. It's important to get those items, those wet items, out of your home and dry the home as quickly as possible to prevent the growth of mold. After 48 hours of dampness, you can assume that there will probably be mold growth unless you've gotten to dry those surfaces. And the next slide, please. And on this slide, I have two additional resources. One is CDC's flood safety site, and the other is information from California Department of Public Health on mold. And it has good information about mold remediation, about tenants' rights in regards to their landlord, and about dealing with and preventing mold in your household. So I think with that, I'll conclude and take any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Wilken. I was going to go right back up and I'm checking the chat. If you have a question, please feel free to add it. I'm going to go to Frank Blanquet. I just don't have, so sorry. If you guys want to put your media name in the chat whenever you do it, then I'll know which outlet you're from or representing today. But how do tribal governments access help from organizations like FEMA when natural disasters affect tribal lands and landslides and flooding? I'm not sure if that's a you question or a Deanna question.
Yeah. Regina, happy to take it. And Vance, if I'm missing anything, please help me fill in. Oftentimes with tribal governments, they go direct to FEMA for access because it is a federal government essentially to another sovereign nation. And so that request is direct to them.
Okay, great. These slides, yes, Plachette with Sac Culture Hub, these slides will be available after this call. This is also from Arceli La Pignon.
Hey, Regina, this is Vance. I just wanted to chime in that we also have a Cal OES tribal liaison, and
Okay,
they can help facilitate those type of requests as well.
okay, great. Let's see here. This question just came in. Should we expect more severe storms during this winter, or are we over? And are we out of the woods in regards to the California drought? She's not sure. Once again, she's not sure if this is a question for this group or not. So we don't know if we're over with all of the rain, all of the flooding that we have now. Does this put us on solid pathway of not being in a drought anymore? If you guys can answer that question, but if not, totally understand to pass that, and we'll talk to our friends over at the Department of Water.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Regina. I think Department of Water Resources may have the best information there, but what I will add too is that I think weather is fickle. And so we, try to get as best intelligence as we can when information comes in. And so I think that we can still probably anticipate rain this go around. Not sure about the level of rain, like an atmospheric river, like we've experienced 8 or 9 of them. So can never say never. So happy to kind of keep you guys updated if we hear anything else.
Okay, and this question is from Kenneth Miller with Inglewood Today. How true are the ongoing rumors that California is close to a natural flood disaster of enormous magnitude?
I love these questions. These are really great. I think we all saw kind of the information and the studies that came out not too long ago on kind of what they're calling the mega flood. And I think, it's ultimately not out of the question. And so we need to ensure that, as a state, that we coordinate as much as possible with our local governments and our federal government to ensure that we're doing everything we can to mitigate for any of these kinds of impacts that could happen from a flooding event like the one mentioned. And so I think that we have worked very closely with the federal government to provide funding and resources for local governments to actually apply for very specific programs to ensure that they can build seawalls and kind of retaining structures and things like that to anticipate for natural disasters to come. And so happy to kind of provide you more information offline on kind of some of those programs. Specifically, I'm thinking about Prepare California, which is essentially a program that we have with the federal government that uses kind of money from the feds, where the state sponsors some of it, and then we have local governments apply to do some really great hazard mitigation work there locally.
Thanks. This question, Henrietta Barrows, East Palo Alto Today. This would be for you, Dr. Wilken. Bleach and baking soda, would this be a problem?
I've seen a number of sources online say that baking soda and bleach can be mixed safely together. I am not going to recommend it because I personally believe that you should never mix anything into a solution that has bleach. If for no other reason, then it can provide that kind of false sense of security, and then you get kind of into situations where you might have something, bottles that are not adequately labeled if you're mixing too many things together and losing track of what's labeled with what. So I would say I would only do that with caution. I know that it's a lot of people do use baking soda with bleach, but I personally am not going to recommend that anyone do that.
All right, the chemist, no chemistry, no creating little chemistry things here. This last question before I go over to the director, Johnson, Pasadena Journal, Solomon Smith. What are some of the long-term effects of contaminated waters in affected areas, and what are the plans for dealing with this on the long term? So Dr. Wilken, I'm not sure if that's a question for you or not.
I'm not sure if it's a question for me either, but I'm happy to answer the best I can. Yeah, this is going to be a jurisdiction by jurisdiction question that would be handled by the environmental health of that jurisdiction, so of that county or of that city. Local environmental health will do they would do their assessments, and the state would be available to provide technical assistance.
Great. We'll go now to Director Kim Johnson, the California Department of Social Services. Ms. Johnson, please go ahead.
Thank you and good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. I would just note the tremendous work, as has been mentioned with previous speakers, that all local communities have been doing across the state. And so as it relates to county social service agencies, tribes, community-based organizations, we're just completely appreciative of the partnership and support in supporting communities across the board. So a couple of resources, and I'll make sure I also add these to the chat. One is just our main website. So that's cdss.ca.gov. And again, I'll add these after I'm done talking here, which can link to a number of resources, including a disaster assistance kind of resource center and hub, where you can find resource guides, including a disaster resource guide specific to immigrant communities in English and in Spanish. And I would just note that a lot of our kind of safety net service delivery is expanding in real time based on what you heard earlier related to the proclamations and the major disaster declaration that the president authorized. So things like Disaster CalFresh, food assistance and support. The 3 counties that have been approved to date will have Disaster CalFresh offerings coming up in these same local assistance centers or registration components that were earlier referenced to get people connected to temporary emergency food resources. So that's a very big and additional resource that is essentially turned on with the major declaration that we'll provide additional information about. But today, the over 5 million individuals that are currently participating in CalFresh, those who have had, for example, power outages related to these storm events, those kinds of things, and have lost the food resources that they had otherwise purchased, can get those replaced within 10 days of that loss by just contacting their county social service agency. And again, that's right on our homepage on the website to find your county resource information. I would also just note that we find in these events that individuals and families and households are impacted maybe in ways that they aren't anticipating. In addition to all of the great federal resources that have been mentioned, we do obviously have the most robust safety net array of any other state across the country. And so whether that's, again, food assistance, cash assistance for families, housing assistance, these kinds of resources, that's exactly what we're here to support and provide. And again, based on the needs of the individual, connect them to. And again, that's typically through, again, a county social service agency. If it's a tribe, There are specific programs that are available for tribal members, like tribal TANF, tribal food programs, et cetera, that are going to be specific there as well. I'll just again note those resource guides have all of these listed out and links to then connect to them. So we want to make sure that's available to everyone. And then I also just want to note, and maybe you've seen these in some of the press releases that we've had over the last several days, just the ability and opportunity for individuals who are impacted to simply really navigate this change, and just recognizing the tremendous stress that impacted people are having related to this event. So we do have and continue to support and share out the Cal Hope line, which you can reach either by phone or through the website and get connected to someone who can just support you in helping navigate the events that have occurred. So that's, again, 1-833-317-HOPE or calhope.org. And again, I'll put that in the chat. In addition, we also think very much, as Vance Taylor referenced, about additional vulnerable communities, and especially as it relates to our older loved ones who might be isolated. Maybe you can't get to kind of the regular touch points and social connections that they're used to. So we also have a friendship line for older adults available at 1-888-670-1360. And so again, want to make sure we're putting out these opportunities and resources for real connections for those impacted, again, who might be disrupted in their living circumstances and situations. So again, in terms of the variety array of resources, everything from getting that person to talk to a person that's going to connect to additional basic meeting your basic needs, food, cash, housing, resources. And so again, I will add these to the chat, and glad to connect anyone to any of these. So thanks again for the opportunity to join you this morning, and glad to take any questions.
Okay, great. And I'm going to try to group the questions that I have. So just if your question doesn't pertain to the speaker, just know that I will ask it at the end so that it all goes with what they're saying. So let's see here. I do see this one does not get in this question. So please, if you have a question for Director Johnson, I will ask that question. Let's see here. So I am seeing, let's see here. Director, I think you just did such a great job. There's some that I'm fumbling through, but I'm going to ask some of them at the end so that they go for, I think there's some for Deanna. To your question, let's see here. So we have one of our former Assembly people members who authored a bill and wanted to ask this question, or this more of a statement, I guess, here, but I'll read it. We should pay attention to older adults in these times of disaster. I authored legislation because during a fire disaster, senior citizens were picked up to save them from fire, and their wheelchairs were left behind. Did those rules go into effect? I asked this question because yesterday the paramedics came to my house to pick up my husband to take him to an emergency room, and they did not mention his wheelchair. Are there any written declarations for emergency personnel around picking up people's wheelchair or things that need to aid them?
Sure, that's a great question. And Vance might also want to join me in response here. I mean, again, in terms of emergency response, a lot has been done to make sure that local emergency service managers and communities know exactly where individuals in their community might need additional assistance in evacuations, or maybe there's durable medical equipment that really is impacted by power outages, those kinds of things. So we continue to strengthen that connection and information sharing. So again, that's known in the emergency services operation. In terms of emergency response, they're first and foremost there in a life-saving measure. So that's their first and ultimate priority. But would also note that to the example, when there are instances where an individual is essentially disconnected to something that they need, in the evacuation, for example, this is a big part of what we do in the temporary shelters that are stood up, to actually have individual personnel people who are assessing access and functional needs. And so where there is something, maybe a cane, a wheelchair, those kinds of things are missing, it's absolutely their purpose to get people connected to anything that they might need that are otherwise don't have access to. So again, there are those steps and procedures in place, but I'll see if Vance would like to add anything to the response.
No, that's great, Director. The fact is that they're always going to do what they can to bring durable medical equipment with you. Nobody ever wants to separate somebody from their service support. So whether that's a wheelchair, whether it's a service animal, or somebody in your support network, the goal is always to evacuate together. When that's not possible, then, as Director Johnson said, at the shelter, there are programs and provisions and mechanisms in place to supplement those needs. So, for example, Red Cross has a memorandum of understanding with New Motion. That's a company that will provide durable medical equipment and complex rehab technology, things like wheelchairs, to individuals at shelters. The other thing is, sometimes people evacuate and they forget things like their wheelchair chargers, right? That can be provided as well. And sometimes people show up at shelters and their wheelchairs are damaged or broken from the evacuation. And so service and repair can also occur for free at those shelter environments. So it's an issue we're committed to. It's one we plan for, and it's one we invest resources to address.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll go to that just so people know I do have your questions. I'm going to ask them because I think that they're going to relate to the next speaker. But this last one, I believe, this is Myra. How many shelters have been set up in California, and which counties?
Sure, I will tell you that I will give you the information from last night, kind of the most recent information that we have. And so it's going to be a point in time, but can also follow up with a comprehensive number in totality. So we had 755 individuals sheltered last night, and that was in 22 congregate shelters and 1 non-congregate. Non-congregate essentially means that it was a hotel or motel that individuals were given access to. So the counties that supported those 22 congregate and 1 congregate shelter include Amador, Merced, Monterey, Sacramento, San Benito, San Joaquin, Santa Barbara, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Stanislaus, and Ventura. So again, to my opening remarks about the cooperation and support of local communities with the state, it really has been a tremendous response. And I'll also note that we did set up a vulnerable populations, priority populations task force to really support individuals, including unsheltered populations, and had direct calls with about over a dozen counties who were most greatly impacted. And so this combination of both warming centers, temporary sheltering supports, but also the 24/7 sheltering that I just referenced have been a tremendous asset and support to especially unsheltered communities, but even a wider, broader community support. So that's in partnership with the local counties, as well as the American Red Cross and the state. So again, tremendous effort to support these. Many of these are at fairgrounds, community centers, and those types of locations. And again, we have staff deployed to support both sheltering support as well as the access and functional needs assessments that I mentioned previously.
Great, thank you so much, Director Johnson. Now we're going to go and just so folks know, I still have your questions in the chat. I think that they relate probably to Mr. Tony Cignarale, who is going to go ahead and give us more updates on the Deputy Insurance Commissioner for Consumer Service of the State of California's Department of Insurance.
Thank you, Regina. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about a few things and then give you some resources that you can use to get more information. First, it should be really, I just want to make a focus on what's covered and what might not be covered. What's going to be covered for these various events, from flooding debris debris flow, mud flow, rain and windstorm, trees falling on property, etc. Whether you're covered for that, whether it's a business or a home or your vehicle is covered, is going to depend on what coverage you have. For example, on your automobile or your vehicle, everyone's required to have, by state law, liability coverage, but many people also have collision coverage and comprehensive coverage. In order to get covered for, let's say, a tree falling on your car or flood damage to your car, that sort of thing, you would need what's called comprehensive coverage on your vehicle, whether it's commercial or a private passenger auto. So that's one thing to look to make sure that the car owner has. Now, for homes, businesses, or renters, if you have those types of insurance, falling trees on your property that damages it, wind and storm damage that damages your property would typically be covered under the standard homeowners insurance, renters insurance, and commercial property insurance policies. Now, flood damage, which could include mud flow, debris flow, that sort of thing, wouldn't be covered under the standard policies unless you had separate flood insurance. And for personal, and most flood insurance, is based on the FEMA sponsored National Flood Insurance Program. So that would be a separate coverage you'd have to purchase. So if you don't have flood insurance, then you wouldn't be covered for flood damage to your home or your business, which again could include mud flow or debris flow. However, there is one exception. If you're in an area that had a prior wildfire, and if the cause of the flooding to your property was from the burn scar of the prior fire, and the facts reflect that, then you could have coverage under your home, renters, or commercial policy for flood damage, mud flow damage, debris flow damage. You would have to then prove that, supported by facts, and whether there's scientific reports that do come out at a later date to show that there was a direct relationship between the prior fire that occurred and the flood damage that caused damage to your property. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then the flood program, which I mentioned earlier, in most cases, if you purchase it, it takes 30 days to kick in. So if you don't already have it, it wouldn't be applicable to these storms, but it's still something to keep in mind to purchase for future reference. We can go to the next. Now, some tips if you do have losses. First, make sure you get a copy of your insurance policy or policies, whether it's your business, your home, your car, flood policy, so that you're clearly aware of what you're covering. Contact your insurance agent to report the claim and ask the questions you need to ask. Any conversations that you have, whether it's with your agent or with your adjuster, claims adjuster that's assigned to you, keep a diary so that you're clear on who you talked to, what you talked about, and what agreements were made. If you were evacuated from your home or your business for mandatorily, or if you had a loss, then you could have some additional living expense coverage for being away from your home. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you do have that coverage, make sure you keep your receipts available of your hotel bills and other expenses, restaurant expenses, that sort of thing, so that you could turn those into your insurance. Also, if you do suffer damage to your property, take pictures and video, even using your phone, of the damage. And your adjuster will come out and inspect it, but you should take your own pictures and videos just so you have a record. And what's important also is don't remediate your damages unless you need emergency repairs until your adjuster comes out to inspect. That could impact whether you're going to be covered or not covered if you do some of those repairs that they can't support were caused by these particular events. And then lastly, don't get scammed by people that are going to be coming out whether it's unlicensed contractor, unlicensed public adjuster, or anyone that's offering to haul away your damaged property, that sort of thing. Make sure they're licensed. You can come to the Department of Insurance if they claim to be a public adjuster, which is an adjuster that works for you for a fee and helps you with your claim against your insurance company. Or if it's a contractor, go to the contractor state license board and verify that they are licensed contractors. If they're not, then you should move on from. And you should also contact the state contractor's license board to report them if they don't have a license. We have a lot of information on our website, on the catastrophe webpage. On the floods, it talks about the differences between a flood, mud flow, debris flow, what's covered, what might not be covered, windstorm damage, what to do after a loss, and several other tips. I will say also, we were recently notified of disaster recovery centers that are opening up starting this week in Sacramento County. There's a couple in Sacramento County area and one in Merced, sponsored by FEMA, and they're going to bring in the federal resources and other resources. For example, the Department of Insurance will be staffing those recovery centers. The addresses, locations, and hours are posted on our website. There's probably other sources of that information, but you could go to our website and get the locations and hours for those disaster recovery centers. And if you want to speak one-on-one to an insurance expert from our department, we'll have a table staff there with our staff, and we'll be able to answer your questions. You can bring in your policy. We'll walk you through certain situations or any questions you might have. And then lastly, I'll end it here, Regina, that as you see there, our 800 number is there. You can call us 800-927-4357. Ask any question you want. If you think there's a need for further investigation, we may open up a case and get with either your insurance agent or your insurance company to ferret out the issue and figure it out. There's also a lot of information on our website. Like I said, that would be a good place to start. And if there are still questions, then contact us and we can go through this question. Thank you. You're on mute.
Regina, you're on mute.
So sorry. I said, I know that we're running out of time, but I know we started like maybe 3 minutes late. So if you could answer these questions really briefly, what types of assistance are available for people who had their cars or other means of transportation destroyed?
Well, if you have auto insurance and you have comprehensive coverage on that auto insurance, then you're covered for the damage to those cars. You could also be covered for what's called loss of use, which would allow you to get a rental car, which could be paid for. And some of them have limits, like $30 a day or $40 a day, that sort of thing. So the first thing to look at would be what type of coverage do you have on these vehicles, and whether you're eligible to get a rental car that would be reimbursed by the insurance company. That would be the insurance aspect of that. There could be other sources through the disaster recovery center or to FEMA or through other sources, but I'm not aware of those.
Okay, great. And then this last one for Solomon, I don't know that you covered this part, but what are the time limits for reporting and asking for assistance? Some may not be able to request or apply for programs right away.
Well, with regard to insurance, there are going to be some timelines that everyone should be aware of. That typically it could be 60 days from the date of the loss to report to the insurance company. So it's always good to get a really good handle on whether you're going to be reporting the claim. Maybe speak to the agent, see if it's worth reporting, see what your deductible is. If the damage is below it, you might not want to report the claim. If the damage is well above it, you should report the claim to get reimbursement. And you want to know from your agent what those time frames are. With regard to the other time frames for federal assistance and any other assistance that might be available, I wouldn't have that information, but the disaster recovery centers and the FEMA information should have that.
Okay, great. And I'm going to end on this last note so that each one of our speakers, I want to thank you all for helping. We'll end with the Philippine News, Francis's question, how maybe each one of you can give 10 seconds, how can we protect our loved ones, especially our elders? They will be contacted and may be scammed. What can we do? Just, 10 seconds from each of you. What can we do to make sure that they stay protected?
Hey, Regina, I'll go first. Deanna Crofts-Pelayo, OES. I think that this is where our media has a huge role to play too. You guys are trusted messengers within the communities. And so if you are able to spread this information about the right and the wrong places to go, I think that will be a huge help.
Thanks. Vance, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot of it comes down to a support network, right? That we have to be willing to do a bit of hand-holding and really walk people through into acute case management when it comes to registering, right? Use the links that we provide, use the links that FEMA provides. Don't go to respond to any emails you don't recognize. There's always a phone number you can call to verify. And just keep in close contact with the whole community and make sure we support each other on that front.
Thank you. Dr. Wilken.
I suppose it's not unheard of for people to say impersonate somebody from a health department or environmental health. So I would say if anybody, if you're ever unexpectedly contacted by someone from a health department or claiming to be from the health department, claiming to be from local environmental health, any of those agencies, you can always ask to see their identification and verify that they are who they are.
Great. And Director Johnson?
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues here, and just would also note that we do have a number of resources. If you just search for adult protective services and other supports, just to beware, things that you can also amplify and spread the message around of exactly what this group has just said about checking and verifying who you're speaking to. So I appreciate that question.
And Tony, you'll have the last word.
Yes, Regina, in addition to the other issues I already mentioned with regard to checking to make sure that people are licensed with the Department of Insurance or the Contractors Tech License Board, the Department of Insurance also has a law enforcement branch. And it's a fraud prevention branch, part of law enforcement. And we'll go out to some of these areas, door to door, and provide documented, pamphlets and about don't getting scammed and what to look out for. We'll also be working with other state agencies such as the Contractors State License Board and going out into these areas and into the field and making sure that people that we see out there with trucks and hauling trucks, et cetera, and checking them to make sure they're licensed. And then talking to the people, whether it's at a community meeting or door to door, like I said, and really letting them know that we're here if in case there is something suspicious, and giving them phone numbers that they can call to report any suspicious activity they see.
Great. Thank you to our speakers today, as well as our reporters and media outlets, as well as the interpreters. Any questions that were not asked, I'm just ad-libbing here. When you receive an email from EMS, I believe ARM with Mosaic Communications will be able to look at those and see how we can help to follow up on those questions for you. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.